They stripped her of her weapon. Said she was too unstable to be trusted outside the wire. One mistake on patrol, and her entire record was erased. 4 deployments, 22 successful missions, gone. She stood in silence as they took her M4, handed her a clipboard, and reassigned her to base admin. The men she trained with wouldn't meet her eyes. The ones she outranked whispered when she walked past. But none of them understood what they had just done. Sergeant Lena Ortiz didn't argue, didn't speak. She went back to her bunk, locked the door, and opened the same footlocker she'd carried since Fort Leonard Wood. Inside was her old service pistol, unofficially hers since Kandahar. A K-bar knife wrapped in her father's combat bandana, and a journal filled with names, some crossed out, some not. She flipped to a fresh page and wrote one more line. They think I'm finished. Good. Her bunkmate, a young private barely out of tech school, watched her in silence. Sarge, what are you doing? Lena looked at her, then down at her hands. Remembering. That night, she ran 5 miles around the perimeter alone. No music, no flashlight, just her breath and the crunch of gravel beneath her boots. She wasn't training. She was hunting something inside herself, something the Army thought it had removed when they took her rifle. It started 3 weeks earlier. A convoy en route to an orphanage in Jalalabad was hit. 5 vehicles all burned. 12 soldiers unaccounted for. No official response had been given. No mission brief sent to Lena, just a name buried in the casualty list, Private Jace Miller. She read it twice. Then a third time. Her son's godfather, the man who stood beside her in every firefight from Herat to Kabul, the man who sent her son birthday cards when she couldn't. They said he was missing. They said there was no plan to retrieve him. Lena stared at the monitor for a long time, then quietly closed the file. She didn't request permission. She didn't check the chain of command. Instead, she pulled out an old recon map she'd kept from a 2011 op near Kunar. The ink had faded, but she didn't need it. She remembered the terrain like it was yesterday. The ridgelines, the ravines, the quiet paths used by smugglers and ghosts. One name came up again. Farid Najjar, local warlord turned arms trafficker. The same man who executed her interpreter 9 months ago in front of a Red Cross team. The same man she'd tracked to that region before command pulled her off the field. He was back, and he had Jace. Lena walked into the storage hangar that night wearing her gray PT hoodie and black combat pants. No one stopped her. No one noticed her slip through the side gate. She moved like smoke. Just another figure in the darkness. She didn't need a rifle. Her sidearm was a Glock 19 with a worn grip. Her knife was the same one her father carried through Vietnam. And tucked into her vest pocket was a folded photo. Her and Jace, sitting on a broken Humvee, laughing like the war didn't exist. She hiked for 2 nights, sleeping under rock shelves and camouflaged netting. No GPS, no radios, just her compass and instincts. She spotted the compound from the cliffs above. 5 guards, 2 armed with AKs, 1 with a shotgun. 1 smoked constantly. 1 always wandered too far from the others. She watched, waited, memorized their rhythms. On the 3rd night at 2:57 a.m., Lena checked her watch. 3 minutes until go. She closed her eyes and listened to the wind move through the valley. In that moment, she felt nothing. No fear, no hesitation. Just silence. She counted it down. 3. She moved from the rocks, dropping silently onto the lower ridge. 2. Her boots hit gravel. She stayed low, blending into shadow. 1. The first guard never saw her. A hand over his mouth. Knife under the ribs. Soft gurgle. Body down. 4 remain. She moved through the outer wall like a ghost, staying in blind spots between searchlight sweeps. A second guard lit a cigarette, leaned against the doorframe. His last breath froze in the air as Lena raised her Glock and pulled the trigger. 1 shot. Center mass. 3 left. She paused by a stack of broken crates, watching 2 others argue near the fuel drums. She tossed a rock behind them. 1 turned. The other stepped forward. She took them both in 2 rapid shots, 1 in the neck, the other in the shoulder. He dropped screaming. She didn't stop to listen. 1 left. She reached the back room where the prisoner was kept. Pried open the door slowly. Saw the last guard standing over Jace, who was bound and gagged. The guard turned, raised his weapon. Lena didn't wait. The final bullet tore through his temple. The room fell silent. Lena dropped to her knees beside Jace. His eyes blinked open, recognition slowly forming. She pulled the gag from his mouth. He coughed, then whispered, "You came." She nodded, pulling him to his feet. "They took my rifle," she said. "Didn't say anything about taking you?" They said she was reckless. Said she was broken. But no one ever asked why. Lena Ortiz joined the army in the first place. Her mother died when she was 8. Her father, a decorated Vietnam sniper, never spoke of the war, but the medals on the wall said everything. She grew up around silence, loaded rifles, and discipline disguised as love. Every morning before school, she ran laps while other kids ate cereal. Every weekend, she learned to break down and reassemble weapons instead of going to parties. By 18, she was enrolled. By 21, she was already shaping raw recruits into real soldiers. Not with fear, but with control. Cold, measured, precise. The Army needed that. For a while, she had her first deployment in Iraq, second in Afghanistan. Never once flinched in combat. But she wasn't loud about it. No war stories, no bar fights. Just orders followed and missions completed. Then came Kandahar, where it all changed. They were clearing a village after a drone strike. Intel said hostiles had regrouped there. The squad moved in tight formation. Dust, sweat, static in the radio. Then one wrong turn and a boy appeared in the alley. 11, maybe 12, holding something. Lena shouted in Dari. He froze. Others screamed behind her. She moved forward slowly. It wasn't a weapon. Just a broken radio, but one of the privates panicked. Fired. The shot missed the boy, ricocheted, and hit a metal drum. The explosion tore through the alley, killing 2 villagers. In the report, they blamed Lena, said she failed to control the situation, failed to de-escalate. They stripped her rifle that afternoon. Psychological fatigue, they wrote. Command suspension, no trial. No second chance. Back at base, her world shrank. They gave her a desk. Told her to file status reports, sign off on gear checklists. The same hands that used to hold lives were now stamping papers. At night, she sat alone. Her fingers twitching from muscle memory, reaching for a trigger that was no longer hers, a weapon she no longer carried. Soldiers passed her in the hallway like she was invisible. The new ones didn't even know her name, but Jace did. He visited her twice a week, brought her black coffee and stories from patrol. The 2 of them had survived so much together. 3 IEDs, a roof collapse. The winter in Bagram when frostbite almost took his toes. He called her Sarge, even when no one else did. One evening, he left a note under her coffee cup. "We're going out tomorrow. Convoy to Jalalabad. Should be routine. Save me some of that awful base chili." She smiled when she read it. Didn't know it'd be the last thing he ever wrote. When the news came that the convoy had been hit, Lena's body moved before her brain did. She found herself in the operations tent demanding intel, demanding action. But she wasn't command. Not anymore. They looked past her like she was just another clerk. One even said, "Ortiz, stay in your lane." So she made her own. She studied satellite footage for hours, tracked movements, identified weak points in the compound where she believed Jace had been taken. Farid Najjar wasn't just a name to her. He was the face in the nightmare, the voice in the video that played when her interpreter begged for mercy. He had escaped justice for years. The system never caught him, but Lena wasn't the system. She packed light, minimal gear, silent weapons, no communications. Her mission wasn't on any board. Her face wasn't on any live tracker. She was invisible by design. The first day she hiked through the ridgeline in total silence. The second day she followed dried riverbeds, moving only at night. Her food was cold rations. Her water was filtered from streams. No fire, no rest, just movement. When she reached the overlook above the compound, she saw the truth. Armed guards, a makeshift prison room. The same flag Najjar used to fly from a burned-out pickup now hung over the courtyard like a warning. No official team was coming for Jace. That much was clear. She scouted for hours, noted every rotation, every blind spot. She studied their timing down to the second. Waited until the moon dipped low and the shadows stretched long. It had to be perfect. She couldn't afford noise. Couldn't afford mistakes. At exactly 2:57 a.m., she moved. Her heart didn't race. Her breath stayed steady. This was the calm, the stillness that her father once called the kill zone, when time slows and the mind becomes sharper than any blade. By the time the fifth man hit the ground, it had only been 83 seconds, and now, with Jace half-conscious against her shoulder, she navigated back through the hills under cover of darkness. Each step measured, each breath slow. She didn't speak. He didn't ask questions. They both knew this wasn't over yet. When she reached the edge of the ridge, she paused, looked back once at the compound. 5 men dead. No backup, no orders. Just her. The army took her rifle, but they forgot who they gave it to in the first place. The sun was just beginning to rise when Lena reached the outskirts of the base, her uniform torn, face streaked with blood, and Jace barely conscious on her back. She didn't sneak through this time. She walked straight through the gate, boots dragging in the dirt, eyes fixed on the command building. Guards at the gate froze. One reached for his radio. Another stepped in front of her. She didn't slow down. They followed in silence as she passed the barracks, the training field, the motor pool. Soldiers turned to look. Some whispered. Some stood up straighter. No one stopped her. Not when they saw Jace, his body bruised, his face swollen, his eyes blinking open behind blood-crusted lashes. By the time she reached the med tent, a crowd had gathered. The same officers who once ignored her now pushed through the crowd with wide eyes. The base commander stepped forward. Colonel Mahoney, decorated, hard-edged, always played by the book. What is this? He asked. She didn't answer. She laid Jace down on the stretcher and turned to him. You said he wasn't a priority, she said quietly. You were wrong. Mahoney stared at her, then looked down at the soldier. He needs immediate care, he said, waving the medics in. They rushed forward, lifting Jace and carrying him inside. Lena stood outside the tent for a long moment. Her hands were still shaking. Her heart was calm. Then the colonel spoke again. You went into a known hostile zone. Alone. Unauthorized. She turned to him. Yes. You engaged hostiles without backup. Yes. You killed 5 men on foreign soil without an op brief, without clearance, and without a rifle. She nodded once. Yes, sir. He stared at her, eyes narrowing. You just started an international incident. She didn't flinch. I saved an American soldier. Silence stretched between them. A long, cold moment where neither looked away. Then he exhaled through his nose and shook his head. Report to my office. 2000 hours. Bring your after-action notes. And Ortiz? She raised an eyebrow. Clean yourself up. You look like hell. She didn't smile. Just turned and walked away. That night, she sat alone in her bunk, typing up the report they didn't want to read. She detailed everything. Timings, movements, every shot fired. No flair, no excuses. Just the truth. 83 seconds. 5 hostiles. 0 hesitation. The base was quiet. No music, no laughter. Just the low hum of generators and the distant rumble of a Black Hawk coming in late. She stared at the screen for a long time after finishing her report. Then she hit print. As she walked to the command building, she noticed something strange. Soldiers were saluting her. Not many, not all, but enough. Some nodded quietly. Some stood at attention as she passed. No one said her name. But the respect was loud in the silence. She entered the briefing room at exactly 2000. The lights were low. A projector displayed sat maps on the far wall. Mahoney was there. So were 4 others. Intel, logistics, 2 from command staff. Her report was already on the table. They didn't ask her to sit. Your report matches satellite heat signatures, the intel officer said. We reviewed drone footage after the fact. We can confirm enemy losses. 5 deceased. Compound cleared. Hostage extracted. Mahoney folded his arms. You disobeyed direct orders. Left the base without clearance. Used force in a politically sensitive region. That alone is enough for court-martial. Lena didn't move. I accept responsibility. But, the logistics officer cut in, you also completed an operation that our own strike team said was too risky to attempt. You did it without casualties, without support, and without a single round wasted. Silence. We have a problem, Mahoney said. You're a liability, but you're also... He stopped, searching for the word. Effective, the intel officer finished, Mahoney sighed. There's two ways this can go. We discharge you quietly, make all this disappear. Or, he hesitated again, we recommend you for reassignment. Lena tilted her head slightly. Reassignment. Covert recon, off books, black level, no uniform. No name, no restrictions. She didn't speak for a while. The room waited. Finally, she looked each of them in the eye. I don't want a promotion, she said. I don't want your medals. I want my rifle back. Mahoney looked at the others, then back at her. That's not possible. She turned to leave. Ortiz, Mahoney said before she reached the door. She stopped. You ever go off book again without clearance? I know, she said. You'll court-martial me. He shook his head. No, I'll come with you. She left the room without another word. That night, she stood at the edge of the training field, watching new recruits fire at paper targets. One of them flinched with every shot. Another forgot to breathe. She watched for 10 minutes, then stepped onto the line. She didn't say her name. Just took the rifle from the shaking private, adjusted the sight, and fired once. Center mass. Dead on. The young soldier stared. Lena handed the rifle back. Next time, don't blink, and she walked away, the echo of the shot still ringing in the air. 3 weeks after the operation, no one mentioned her name on record. No official commendation. No reprimand. Just silence. The kind that meant people were watching closely, deciding if she was a problem worth keeping or a weapon worth sharpening. Lena didn't care. She wasn't in this for medals anymore. She spent her mornings running drills alone in the motor pool, afternoons on the range, practicing with any weapon she could get her hands on. She knew she'd never get her M4 back. Not officially. But the rumor was clear. She was back on someone's radar. The kind of people who didn't wear rank. The kind who showed up without warning. It was a Thursday when they came. 2 men in plain fatigues. No insignia, no names. One was tall, the other didn't speak. They met her at the edge of the range while she was reloading. Ortiz, the tall one said. Come with us. She wiped the sweat from her brow and followed them without asking questions. They led her into a secure tent that hadn't been there the day before. Inside was a map of northern Helmand province, drones, satellite feeds, live chatter scrolling across a monitor. In the center of it all, a woman in civilian clothes. Sharp eyes. No smile. You're not supposed to be here, the woman said, looking Lena up and down. Neither are you, Lena replied. The woman smirked. We have a situation. 3 aid workers went missing yesterday near Lashkar Gah. Civilians, American. Their convoy was hijacked by remnants of Najjar's crew. You created a power vacuum. Now smaller snakes want the crown. Lena folded her arms. You want me to clean up your mess? The woman stepped closer. No. We want you to go back and do what you do best. Alone, quiet, fast. Lena looked at the sat map. The terrain was familiar. Mountains like teeth. Dry creek beds. Villages that disappeared off-grid years ago. What's the mission? Infiltrate. Confirm hostage location. If extraction's viable, proceed. If not, burn it. Lena didn't blink. What's the timeline? Now. By nightfall, she was already moving. No rifle. Just the same setup she trusted. Glock, K-bar, lightweight armor, comms she probably wouldn't use. Her gear looked basic, but every inch was customized. No noise. No wasted space. As she trekked through the desert hills, the silence returned. That same cold calm that came before something irreversible. She didn't fear it anymore. She welcomed it. The compound was buried deep in a valley. A forgotten fort from decades ago, now repurposed by warlords and cowards. She spotted 3 guards on the north side, 2 more inside a tower with a floodlight. Sloppy security. They weren't expecting anyone to come looking, especially not someone like her. She sat up on a ridge for hours, watching. The aid workers were held in the basement of a stone building, hands tied, barely moving. One tried to comfort the others. A medic, judging by the posture, steady under pressure. Lena waited until the moon passed behind the mountain. Then she moved. Her first target was the outer tower. The 2 men inside were laughing over something, backs turned. One never heard her enter. The other barely had time to raise his hand before she pressed the knife to his throat. 2 bodies down. No sound. She used their own rope to lower herself from the tower. At ground level, she moved through the shadows, past rusted trucks and broken crates. Another guard stood by a fire barrel, smoking, his weapon slung over one shoulder. She approached from the left, grabbed his collar, pulled him back and down. One strike to the throat, then silence. The final two heard the noise. One shouted. The other ran toward the sound. She dropped them both. 2 quick shots, one in the leg, one in the chest. Fast, precise. Inside the basement, the aid workers looked up in shock as Lena cut through the lock. They didn't speak at first. Just stared. "You're not Army," one of them whispered. "No," she said, helping them up. "I'm what shows up when the Army's too slow." They moved fast, climbing through the outer gate and disappearing into the ravine. A truck waited half a mile out, an unmarked vehicle, engine running, the kind of ride that didn't exist on any official log. As they drove off, one of the aid workers looked at her, eyes wide. "What's your name?" Lena didn't answer. She just looked out the window. Back at the base, the civilians were taken for debrief. No questions were asked about how they got out. No mention of who rescued them. Later that night, Lena sat alone in the empty chow hall, eating canned peaches straight from the tin. Her hands still smelled like desert dust and blood. The base was quiet again. No applause. No ceremony. Then a man approached. The silent one from earlier. He sat across from her without asking. "Clean job," he said. Lena didn't look up. "You made some noise on this one. There'll be more eyes on you now." She kept eating. "Still don't want a rifle?" She set down the tin. "I want the next name," she said. He smiled. "It's already waiting." They told her the next target was deeper into Najjar's fractured territory, a cluster of villages where loyalties shifted with a paycheck and the wind. The silent man slid a thumb across the sat map and pointed to a ragged loop road that cut through a valley like a scar. 3 days ago, a convoy carrying female teachers and a pediatrician had vanished. No ransom note, no bargaining videos, just empty tracks and overturned crates of school books. Lena listened. She didn't need the map to know what that meant. Warlords took what they could sell and they sold fear first. The women were easy currency. They were also the kind of people who never made it home without someone willing to break rules. She packed lighter than before. Smaller rations, a rolled poncho. The Glock felt familiar in her hand. The K-bar was wrapped in fresh tape. She also took 2 things she never advertised, a small medical kit and a rusted harmonica that had belonged to her father. The med kit was practical. The harmonica was not. It fit in a pocket like a talisman. She moved at dusk and rode the night to the waypoint where the ridgeline tapered into farmland. From there, she walked the last 5 kilometers. The air tasted of dust and diesel. Dogs barked like alarms in the distance. Children slept in the open, their blankets thin as promises. The village was more fortified than the last compound. Sandbags, a guard shack with a flickering lamp, a pickup with a mounted belt of ammunition. They weren't amateurs. The men on watch cleared their throats and chewed tobacco until the sun set. Lena sat up on a low wall outside the compound and watched. She made notes in her head. One man patrolled the perimeter with predictable impatience. 2 traded stories near the water trough. One sat on the truck talking on a cracked phone. Inside, lanterns glowed like jars of captured stars. She couldn't see the basement from where she sat, but instinct told her the women were below ground. Moved there the day the convoy arrived. At 23:45, she moved. She hugged the shadow of a collapsed fence and approached the guard shack where the patrolman who always smoked leaned against the planks. The man smelled of sweat and cheap gin. Lena eased up behind him and pressed the K-bar to the base of his skull. He slumped without a sound. She slid his body into the ditch and took his cigarette, an absurd little trophy, then pressed on. The truck driver was asleep with the engine ticking. Lena crept up, wrapped her hand around the back of his neck and twisted. He choked, flailed, then went still. She worked quickly, efficient hands doing a job she had never practiced for ceremony. 3 men left. She crawled under a tangle of brush and moved toward the courtyard. The floodlight's rhythm was a metronome. Lena timed her path against it, moving in the dark breaths between illumination. A lantern glowed by the cellar hatch. Voices muffled down below. A child's laugh drifted like a small, bright thing. Her lungs tightened. She lowered herself into the cellar by rope, descending through the scent of wet stone and stale air. The room smelled like fear and old flour. 8 bodies sat on the floor, their hands bound with rough rope. One of the women had a fever and a rag across her forehead. When Lena cut their bonds with a scavenged blade, the smallest of them reached out and touched her sleeve. "You are not like them," the woman whispered in broken English. "I am like them when I have to be," Lena said, and the words sounded older than she felt. They moved slow and quiet, because rushing would mean exposing too many. Lena organized them, one to carry medicines, another to keep watch, the rest to move in pairs. She tied a bandana around the fevered woman's head and handed her a sip of water. The woman's eyes closed with relief, and Lena realized she had been holding her breath without knowing it. They climbed the cellar ladder in pairs. The courtyard was a patchwork of shadows. One guard paced near the well, changing his position like a nervous animal. 2 men argued quietly by the stacked crates. Lena signaled, and the group flowed like a practiced unit. The aid workers followed, silent and slow as ghosts, their faces pale in the moonlight. At the gate, the truck driver's buddy stood leaning, his silhouette stiff. He noticed the sound of footsteps and turned. Lena stepped out from the shadow and fired 2 quick rounds. The man dropped and did not move. The men by the crates heard and scrambled toward the noise. They weren't soldiers. They were opportunists in stolen shirts. They moved with the graceless violence of people who had never been trained to die properly. Lena took them down with efficiency that surprised even her. One went out with a single shot to the center mass. The other tried to run and tripped. She finished him with a clean, measured shot. The courtyard swallowed the sounds. The dog that had been barking earlier wheeled and bolted deeper into the village. They melted into the ravine and waited in the scrub until dawn washed the valley soft and pale. The women shivered under borrowed coats while Lena kept a rotating watch. She hummed a few notes on the harmonica to keep the cold from seizing her throat. The melody was tiny and old, the kind of music that reminded her of a father who believed in small, steady things like taking apart a rifle at dawn and teaching someone how to breathe. They found a route back that avoided the patrol paths. Lena led them through an irrigation ditch and across a meadow where the grass came up to their knees, soaking their boots in the cool night. At one point, a child from the group scampered ahead and slipped into a shallow ravine. Lena dove headfirst to pull the child out. Water rushing over her elbows, mud cooling her palms. The child looked up at her with enormous, trusting eyes and grinned. "You're a soldier," the child said simply. "No," Lena said, and the word was a promise. "I'm someone who comes back." When they reached the pickup she had stashed a mile out, they piled in with exhausted limbs and hands still trembling. Lena drove without headlights, watching the road with the same measured patience she used in a firing lane. Dawn found them halfway to the checkpoint. Soldiers at the gate squinted at the sleepy caravan of rescued civilians. Medical teams swarmed. Blankets and warm cups of tea changed the set of faces. At debrief, she spoke plainly. She answered the questions they asked and left out the things they would have punished her for if they had known. She did not boast. She did not apologize. She only watched the women through the observation window as they were led to safety and felt something like a wound close. Later, in the quiet of the motor pool, the silent man found her again. He handed her a small note with coordinates and a single line. "Next time, it will be harder." Lena folded the note and slipped it into her pocket next to the harmonica. She tightened the strap on her Glock and walked toward the firing line, where a new recruit's rifle flinched wildly against the paper target. She took the rifle, steadied it, and the shot landed center mass, like a punctuation mark. She walked away, leaving behind the taste of smoke and the warmth of a job done. They told her to wait. For what, they didn't say. Just stand by, as if she were a piece of equipment they could store on a shelf until the next explosion. Lena didn't argue. She spent the next 4 days in silence, cleaning her gear, fixing a torn strap on her vest, and sleeping in 2-hour shifts like she was still in the field. Waiting to her didn't mean rest. It meant preparation, but something felt different this time. There was no briefing, no hushed meeting in the corner of the operations tent, no man in plain clothes offering a folded map. Only silence and eyes. Everyone seemed to be watching her now, not with suspicion, but with unease. As if the story of what she'd done had spread, and the image didn't match the rules they'd memorized. Soldiers who used to avoid her now nodded when they passed. Others moved aside, not out of fear, but respect. Still, no one spoke first. On the 5th day it came. Not an order, but a letter, hand-delivered. No return address. A single sentence written in clean, blocky penmanship. He was never dead. No signature. No explanation. Lena read it once. Then again, her pulse didn't spike. Her hands didn't shake. She folded the paper and slid it into her pocket. There was only one he the message could mean. And if it was true, it changed everything. 8 months ago, during a failed extraction outside Herat, Captain Eric Maddox, the man she once trusted more than anyone in her unit, was declared killed in action. Ambushed. Burned vehicle. No body recovered, only his tags. She had grieved for him in silence. No funeral. No closure. Just a single set of dog tags returned in a brown envelope, and now someone wanted her to believe he was alive. She started digging the moment the sun went down. First stop, communications. A young corporal who owed her a favor unlocked the archives. Lena pulled every report, satellite image, and audio file from the day Maddox disappeared. The route looked wrong. The timestamps didn't match the mission logs, and the last radio transmission was cut off mid-sentence. Not because of interference, because someone had shut it off. She traced the discrepancies to a man named Kroll, logistics chief, former private contractor, the kind of man who knew how to rewrite timelines. She remembered seeing him only once before, a handshake in the command tent, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Now his name was listed as on leave, but no one could say where, which meant he wasn't on leave. He was hiding. Lena pulled strings, quietly. She got his last known location, a civilian bar outside of Kabul, frequented by contractors, smugglers, and the kind of people who sold intel for whiskey. She didn't wait for approval. She hit the road by dawn. The bar sat half-buried in dust, its walls covered in graffiti, a bullet hole in every window. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and bad decisions. Lena walked through the front door wearing civilian fatigues and boots that still carried desert mud. She didn't bother to sit. Kroll was at the back table, alone, heavy-set, eyes like wet glass. A pistol barely hidden under his coat. She walked up and stood over him. He looked up, blinked once, and smiled. I wondered when you'd come. Where is he? Kroll shook his head. You think I'd just hand that over? She pulled the chair out and sat across from him. Her voice stayed low, calm. You sold him out. You were his handler, and you left him behind. Kroll's expression changed, just slightly. He knew the risks, he muttered. You left him alive, she said. You told command he burned with the truck. You faked the tags. His silence confirmed it. She leaned closer. So now you're going to tell me where they're keeping him. He took a breath. If I do, I'm dead. Lena stared at him. If you don't, you'll wish you were. That did it. He scribbled coordinates on a napkin, handed it over with trembling fingers. Old outpost, he whispered. Used for holding high-value assets. Off books. No name. If he's still alive, that's where he is. She stood. Kroll looked up at her one last time. He asked for you, you know, the day he disappeared. Called your name on the radio before they cut him off. Lena walked out without answering. The ride to the outpost was long. The terrain was familiar, too familiar. She passed the same ridge they once used as cover during reconnaissance ops. The same broken windmill where Maddox once carved their initials with a bayonet as a joke. Back then, everything felt simpler. Missions had rules. People came home. She reached the outpost after sundown, abandoned on paper, but she could see faint lights flickering from inside. Armed guards, at least 6. No uniforms, no flags. Ghosts guarding a secret. Lena slipped around the perimeter, studying movement. Same approach as always. Measure, adapt, strike. She watched for 2 hours, then made her move. The first guard was alone by a fuel drum. One strike to the throat. Quiet. Efficient. The second stood near the gate, distracted by a satellite phone. He never saw her blade. Inside, she moved like a whisper, down a hallway, past rusted lockers and abandoned gear. Then a metal door, reinforced. She picked the lock in under 10 seconds. The room was dark, cold, and there, sitting on the ground, was Maddox. He looked up, eyes sunken, beard overgrown, wrists raw from restraints. He stared at her like he was looking at a ghost. "Lena?" he rasped. She knelt beside him. "Yeah, it's me." He reached up, touched her face like he didn't believe it. "They said you were gone. They said you broke." She smiled faintly. They were right. He laughed and it came out broken. "But it was real. We're not done yet," she said. "You're coming home." And for the first time in months, Lena Ortiz felt the weight of silence lift. They didn't walk out. They fought out. The moment Lena cut Maddox's restraints, the alarms triggered, silent sensors, pressure plates, maybe even a heartbeat monitor. She knew better than to panic. Panic cost seconds and seconds cost lives. She yanked him up, slinging his arm across her shoulder. His legs were weak, but he was still Maddox, still a soldier. The hallway lit up red. Boots thundered on metal grates. Voices barked in a language neither of them had time to translate. Lena kicked open the side door, took 2 quick shots, and dragged Maddox into the open air. The night was black and starless. Somewhere to the east, a dog barked and went silent. He tried to speak. She shut him up with a look. 2 more guards came from the left, weapons drawn. She rolled behind a rusted barrel and returned fire. One went down. The other hesitated. Maddox, groggy and half-starved, pulled the man's leg out from under him. Lena finished it. She caught her breath just long enough to see the pickup truck she stashed 3 days earlier, still parked behind the ridge. They staggered toward it, Maddox wheezing from the strain. His ribs were probably fractured. His mouth was cut. But he didn't complain. He never had. They reached the truck just as another group shouted from behind. Lena threw Maddox into the passenger seat and jumped behind the wheel. Headlights off, engine growling. She punched the gas and didn't look back. Bullets cracked the back windshield. One embedded in the metal frame inches from Maddox's head. "You always drive like this?" he muttered. "Only when I'm late," she replied. They didn't speak again for 20 minutes. The road out was narrow, winding between cliffs and sharp ridges. The kind of terrain that swallowed patrols whole. Lena had memorized the path. Every rock, every blind turn. She drove like the engine was part of her pulse. Maddox coughed. Blood spotted his shirt. She glanced over. His eyes were open, barely, but still sharp. "You're not surprised it's me," she said quietly. He turned his head. "They told me you were gone, discharged, maybe dead." "I was," she said. "But then I got bored." He gave her a broken smile. They reached the extraction point at 0400. It wasn't a base. It was a flat plateau with a single blinking signal light and a buried radio beacon. No flags, no names. Just coordinates and a promise. Lena stepped out, scanned the horizon, and waited. 10 minutes later, the Black Hawk appeared like a ghost in the sky, silent until it was almost on top of them. Dust swirled. Maddox squinted against the downdraft. Lena didn't flinch. The door slid open. A medic jumped down, helped Maddox aboard. Lena followed, but didn't sit. She stood by the open hatch, eyes scanning the dark earth below. The medic gave her a strange look. "You're not coming with us?" She shook her head. "Not yet." Maddox reached out, grabbed her wrist. His voice was raw. "Why?" She met his eyes. "Because someone's still cleaning up your mess." The bird lifted into the air. Maddox didn't let go until the last second. She stepped back and watched as the helicopter disappeared into the gray. Then she turned toward the horizon and walked. By the time she returned to the outpost base, the sun was rising. Her boots were coated in dust. Her skin burned from wind and rage. She entered through the rear gate. No guards stopped her. Inside the command tent, the silent man was waiting. As always, he slid a folder across the table. They weren't just holding Maddox. She opened it. Inside, photos, documents, lists of operations that had never made it into any database. Missions that weren't black, they were erased entirely. And in the center of it all, Kroll. Not just logistics. Not just cover-up, he was orchestrating it. Why? She asked. The silent man shrugged. War makes money. Chaos makes more. Maddox got too close, so they made him disappear. Lena leaned on the table. And now? The man met her eyes. Now we make them disappear. She stared at the final photo in the file. A meeting. 5 men in civilian suits. Government officials. Corporate contractors. All smiling. And Kroll standing behind them like a shadow. She picked up the photo. Studied it. What do you need from me? She asked. The man's answer was simple. Same thing you've always done. Go where we can't. Do what we won't. She nodded slowly. This wasn't just about rescuing soldiers anymore. It was about burning down the machine that built the lies. That night, she sat alone in the armory, reassembling a rifle she hadn't touched in months. Not regulation, modified, personalized. Matte, black. Silencer ready. The weapon fit in her hands like a memory. She clicked the final piece into place and pulled the bolt. Back! The rifle whispered readiness. They took it from her once. Now, she was taking everything back. They brought her back to a ceremony she never wanted. The tent smelled of lemon polish and coffee. Rows of officers sat like teeth. Flags hung heavy and bright. Families in civilian clothes blinked in the unfamiliar light of recognition. Lena stood off to the side, rifle at her feet like a thing that belonged to someone else. Her uniform was clean for the first time in months. Her hair was pulled back. Her hands didn't tremble. Colonel Mahoney read the citations with that dry official cadence that tries to flatten a life into a paragraph. He spoke of unauthorized action and of bravery. He read aloud the satellite confirmations, the names of the 5 neutralized hostiles, the rescue of Jace Miller, the extraction of the aid workers, and the recovery of Captain Maddox. He read about intel files uncovered that exposed a network of corruption moving in the shadows between contractors and officials. He spoke of men who faked deaths and sold soldiers to silence. When he finished, he said, Sergeant Lena Ortiz, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty, you are awarded the Bronze Star with Valor. The applause was polite and small at first. Then it grew. Not the roar of a stadium, but the quiet, sustained clapping of people who suddenly remembered what they owed. Old faces she had seen on night watches stood, tears damp in their eyes. Recruits she'd steadied on the range nodded, their heads like little flags. Jace, gaunt but alive, sat in the front row with a blanket across his legs and his hand raised when Lena glanced his way. She accepted the medal without theatrics. The ribbon slid over her head like a sentence being closed. She felt the weight of metal against her sternum and thought of all the things metal had done for and to her: doors, bullets, dog tags. It was both heavier and lighter than she imagined. After the formalities, the room cleared and they pulled Lena into an office that smelled like old paper and incense. Men she had never trusted sat behind a glossy oak desk. They had titles that could buy islands. On the desk lay a folder with a seal and a single line: Reassignment to Special Recon. Black Ops. Off the books. A promotion with no address. She looked at the folder like it was a splinter. You saved lives, Mahoney said softly. You can keep doing that on a bigger scale. We need you where the rules break. Lena stared at the wall where a faded picture of a young soldier saluting hung crooked. She thought of Jace's laugh, the harmonica notes drifting in a cellar, Maddox's fingers fumbling over his dog tags as he whispered her name. She thought of the boys and girls in the village who would never again sleep in a basement because someone showed up. She opened her mouth and surprised herself with the answer. No, she said. I won't disappear for them again, they pressed. This is bigger than you. She folded the folder in half and slid it back. Maybe, but no one gets to decide I'm a ghost anymore. Word of her refusal ricocheted through the ranks. Some criticized, some cheered. The men in suits suspected she would take the money, the power, the clean deniability. She chose something dirtier and slower. She opened a small training program for military daughters and for women who returned from war with hands that wanted to hold a gun and hearts that needed to mend. The school had no brass band to announce it. It started in a cold gym by the base. Rows of cots stacked against the walls, fold-out tables for maps, and a single bulletin board where she pinned photographs. Jace, the harmonica, a student's handwritten thank you. The first class had 4 girls and 2 mothers. One woman who'd been an Army medic in another life came back to teach field care. A retired sergeant with a limp came to teach discipline. Lena taught everything she knew: how to clear a doorway, how to read a map, how to forgive yourself for the things you had to do to survive. She also taught something quieter: how to use anger, how to turn it into fuel for small acts that mattered, how to fix a rifle and not let it fix you, how to tell the truth in a world that preferred tidy lies. The students ranged in age: teenagers who wanted to understand their father's medals, middle-aged women who had seen the world fall apart in different uniforms, and veterans who needed to find their place after the war. Lena used the harmonica in class sometimes, not as training, but as a reminder that people carry more than weapons into battle. She played a single thin tune and the room quieted. The melody was enough to steady a hand. Months later, the men who had traded secrets for favors found themselves in courtrooms. Files she'd helped uncover were leaked to prosecutors. Kroll's name surfaced in testimony, his smile replaced by a small, broken figure in a cell. The network that had profited off chaos cracked open like a rotten log. It did not fix everything. It did not put back every lost life. But it did make a dent. And that dent was a place to start. People asked Lena if she ever regretted going off the books, about the moment she chose to walk alone into compounds at night. She never answered directly. Instead, she would show them rather than tell them, pull out a set of dog tags or a photograph or the faded harmonica. She would point to a daughter in class steadying her breathing before a marksmanship drill and say, quietly, "She doesn't get to be taken." Years later, veterans would come back to the school to teach, and their children would come to learn not how to kill, but how to return. Lena's program expanded into a nonprofit that placed mentors in small towns and cities where returning soldiers had no maps home. She kept one room in the building with a single case on the wall. Inside sat a rifle, its metal polished, its stock worn smooth by many hands. It was not hers to carry into war anymore. It was something else. A relic of a life she had tried on and then set down to build something that lasted. On the anniversary of the operation that changed everything, Lena stood at the edge of the training field and watched a line of girls run a drill. They moved with the measured patience of people who had learned to wait and then act. A young woman approached her and asked, "Do you miss it?" Lena looked out at the field, at the flags, at the small faces turned toward hers. "I miss the people who didn't get to come home," she said. "But not the fighting." The girl nodded. Lena reached into her pocket and took out the harmonica. She played the same thin tune her father used to play when dawn broke. The sound cut through the crisp air like a small, stubborn light. Someone joked that the army had taken her rifle that day. They were half right. They took a weapon. She became one.